Okay, why don't we begin? My name is Tom Fain. I'm a retired securities lawyer. I've judged in this program for 3 years, this being the third. The first year, delightfully, it was in person on campus, and I was able to deal with that. Since then, it's become more and more technical, and it left my pay grade behind a long time ago. So let's begin by introducing the other judges who are present.
Hi, good morning. My name is Tracy Frazier Wigglesworth, and I am a political attorney.
What is a political attorney, Tracy?
I focus on campaign finance, compliance, and election law,
I see.
working with campaigns and committees.
Thank you for that clarification. Who's next?
Hi, I'm Robert Tisdale. I'm a entertainment executive, business owner in Los Angeles, California.
Okay, so I guess we'll proceed. I've been asked to read this statement to the team. I think that you probably already know most of this, but since it's in the protocol, I'll go ahead and read it again. In this part of the competition, you are taking a fictional business identity and assigning a fictional business identity to the judges. Please make sure everyone knows who you are. You will have 25 minutes to describe the legal, financial, and ethical dimensions of the problem and to recommend a solution that passes muster on all three counts. During this time, barring the unforeseen, you will not be interrupted. When you're finished, the judges may ask questions for 10 minutes or so. If the judges don't ask questions, don't be dismayed by that or read it as a lack of interest, because it may well be that your presentation is so good, nobody has any questions. After the questions, the judges may give you feedback. Okay, let's introduce the team and then you may begin.
I'm Ali Mirza. I'm a senior. Yeah.
I'm Hannah. I'm a sophomore.
I'm Alex Studnick. I'm also a sophomore.
My name is Margarita, and I'm a junior studying finance and philosophy.
Okay. Should we go ahead and share our screen and we can get started?
Yes, please do.
Perfect. Sent. Hello. Welcome, CEMEX Board of Directors. We here at Vulcan Solutions, and we'll be presenting to you today a solution inherently related to building with zero. It's a catchy title, and we're excited to hear with you more about exactly what we mean when we say building with zero. Again, I'm Ali.
I'm Alec.
I'm Hannah.
And I'm Margarita.
And with that, we'll jump right into it.
51 billion tons. That is the world's yearly total of CO2 emissions. Now, where does this all come from? Let's break it down. When we keep warm and cool, that's about 7%. Anytime we try to get around with planes, cars, trucks, that accounts for 16% of emissions. Everything that we grow, from plants, food, animals, agriculture, that accounts for about 20%. Whenever we plug things in, we're contributing to 27% of our carbon emissions. And yet, most of all, when we make things like humans love to do, cement, steel, plastic, that accounts for about 1/3, 31% of all carbon emissions. From that category of things that make things, we have cement and concrete as well. Now, cement is the key strengthening ingredient in concrete. However, because of its specific calcination process, it emits obscene amounts of CO2. In fact, so much that cement accounts for more than 3 times the CO2 emissions of the entire civil aviation field. So with 3 tons of concrete used annually per person on the planet, and of course this makes sense because concrete is going into our schools, our hospitals, our runways, our roads, almost everything that we build is made out of concrete. It shapes our world, and this prevalence is due to nothing but its efficacy. Ultimately, there is no credible alternative to concrete. And in fact, innovation in concrete offers the biggest potential for CO2 reduction in the built environment. Carbon performance is the defining competitive issue for the foreseeable future. and Margarita is going to tell you a little bit about the legal ramifications. I'm sorry, about our plan first.
What is your plan for cement? By 2050, another 2.5 billion people are expected to live in urban areas. As we can see on this chart, the growth is increasing, and that means that by 2025, we will need to build more than 1 billion new homes. That is crucial. That means that 60% of the buildings that will exist in 2050 are yet to be built. This means constructing a city of the size of New York every month for the next 40 years. So, Cemex, what is your plan for cement? Here is ours. It is called CO2 mineralization by retrofitting. What we do is we use carbon utilization solutions, and we basically turn the CO2 into limestone through different calcification processes. Now, this could be through chemicals, through fuels, through plastics and concrete. And as we can see, the carbon utilization is having the potential of becoming of more than $800 billion to $1 trillion industry by the end of 2030. That means that we have the potential to reduce up to 3 gigatons of annual CO2 emissions by 2030. How does carbon utilization solution work, you might ask? Well, every aspect of the solution makes it very incredible. First, the CO2 will not leak back into the atmosphere unless the concrete goes above 750 degrees. Now, we know that in the industry, the cement will never reach that point. So our CO2 is effectively thermolocked. The second aspect is that it increases the strength. And because we inject the CO2, we're playing with the chemical composition of the cement, and we can actually increase its load capacity. So that way we can see it through the nature studies, in fact, and through the articles. The process can increase the strength, not only in the early stage, but also in the production stage. And Cemex is no small part of your future. And now with that, Alec will take us into the ethical aspects of the solution.
Now, as Margarita said, the solution is not only possible and implementable, but it's also completely ethically sound. First, from that 30% number that I mentioned earlier, 8% of the world's carbon emissions come directly from concrete manufacturing. Obviously, Cemex is the world's second largest concrete manufacturer, has an ethical responsibility to employ CO2 mineralization, and as a result, entirely eliminate Cemex's contribution to that number. For some more notes on ethics, of course, there's the obvious environmental impact. Reducing that number, that contribution to carbon emissions will do nothing but help the efforts to curb greenhouse gas emissions. However, in addition to that, there's also the benefit of Cemex integrating into more sustainability-minded spheres in all of the aspects of business, whether it be distribution, production, consumption. The entire world, the business world itself, is moving towards sustainability and green efforts. And this is just another step in that direction for Cemex. Finally, there's no ethical repercussions. And on the next slide, I'm going to evaluate or analyze a little more the possible ethical repercussions and where those don't come into play here. So first, of course, as I mentioned, there's that obvious responsibility to the environment. And this plan is not only not negative for the environment, but it's carbon neutral at worst. In fact, there's always the potential that more successful advances in this technology will lead to carbon negation. Additionally, of course, Cemex and its board of directors has a responsibility to the company as a whole. You have employees, you have shareholders. However, our solution is retrofitted to your factories and is extremely low cost. So there's very little concern there. Additionally, there's the obvious responsibility to consumers, those who will actually be impacted by the quality of your product. Now, as Margarita mentioned, our concrete that uses CO2 mineralization is proven to actually have a higher load capacity. It's stronger than standard concrete. So there's no worries of unforeseen disasters that wouldn't have equally impacted regular concrete. Additionally, there's of course a responsibility to Cemex's workers. However, it should be noted that because our solution is retrofitted, it's not inherently any more dangerous than regular concrete manufacturing because the process is actually so similar. Finally, it's important to note that this is one of those few situations where Cemex can actually pursue profit while simultaneously pursuing ethical and green solutions. Now, Hannah is going to tell you a little bit about how these financials come into play.
Hi. Not implementing our solution will cause you to have significant financial losses. These losses primarily stem from the Paris Climate Agreement, where nearly every country agreed to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. As the deadlines approach, countries will need to start to press down more on the emitters of carbon dioxide. It has been estimated that 16%, that the concrete industry will need to reduce their emissions by 16% to meet the 2030 deadlines of the Paris Climate Agreement. There have been many methods that have been proposed to reduce the carbon emissions. One method has been a carbon tax. As of right now, 25 countries have implemented or are implementing a carbon tax, with Sweden being the first to do so, and they have seen great success with it. They have reduced their emissions by 27% with a carbon tax. While no such tax exists in the United States, where most of Cemex's or most of your production of concrete occurs, as the deadlines approach, it is likely that some form of a carbon tax will be passed. The most recent proposal came from the Climate Leadership Council, and they proposed a $43 for every ton of carbon dioxide, that gets released. This number would increase yearly by 3 to 5% above inflation. This would come at a significant cost to you, because for every 1 ton of cement that you produce, 0.9 tons of carbon dioxide are released. You currently produce 92 million tons of cement a year in the United States. That is approximately 8.3 million tons of carbon dioxide a year that you produce as a byproduct. That would cost you $3.56 billion in losses with a carbon tax in just the first year. In the second year, the tax number will increase, and every year your losses will grow. Additionally, you also face a potential loss of ability to secure contracts. Not only do you need to produce your concrete, you need to sell it. In the public sector, there have been various initiatives to only use building materials that are environmentally preferred. These come in the form of Vulcan initiatives that are mandates passed by local governments like states, or the Environmental Protective Agency advising the federal agencies on what building materials they should use. There have also been instances in more on a municipal and a county level that requiring low carbon concrete to be used in public and private projects. By your own estimates, 21 billion cubic tons of concrete will be used in 2050. If you do not change your practices now, you will face a significant loss, either in the form of a carbon tax, or to be taxed on the amount of carbon dioxide that you release, or in a loss of contracting ability because you are not a sustainable company. However, if you do implement our solution, you will have profits due to production efficiencies, an increased tax benefit, and an increased marketing potential. Other concrete companies that have implemented a solution similar to this, where they inject carbon dioxide into the concrete, have found that they had $3,100 worth of production efficiencies for every 1 ton of carbon dioxide that they stored. These production efficiencies come from the fact that the solution is retrofitted. It's at a low cost. It takes a short time to install the technology. And as Margarita mentioned, the increased strength allows for a reduction in the amount of cement, the most costly ingredient of concrete, that is used. One plant every year can store up to 2,633 tons of carbon dioxide a year. In just one plant in 1 year, you would have $8.2 million worth of production efficiencies. If half of your plants in the United States were retrofitted, that would be $1.1 billion in production efficiency. Additionally, you also have a tax benefit for the carbon sequestration and storage. From the 2018 bipartisan budget, Section 45Q, there is a $35 tax credit for every ton of carbon dioxide that is stored. So with one plant, you can save $92,000 in corporate taxes. Additionally, with our solution, you will have an increased marketing potential. As I mentioned earlier, the public sector is looking to use environmentally preferred building materials, which your concrete now with the solution will be. And in the private sector, the concrete also qualifies for leadership in energy and environmental design certification, the credits for certification. The LEED program is done by the United States Green Building Council, and they certify buildings as sustainable. And there has been evidence that consumers and property owners want to own property that is sustainable. These properties have higher prices by about 5% on new properties, and they have an increased resale value of 30% on these certified properties in comparison to their non-certified counterparts. Additionally, they also have higher occupancy rates by 20% than their non-certified counterparts. So if you implement our solution, not only will you not have to pay that carbon tax, you will also have an increased marketing potential, tax benefits, and production efficiencies. I'll pass it off to Margarita to talk about the legal aspect now.
The legal liability issues also remain critically important. Why, you might ask? Well, they clarify potential liabilities, they promote high standards, and help encourage investment. They can also raise public confidence in our technology. We provide clear parameters for regulators and to their responsibilities and power and where their resources and action is necessary. Next slide, please. There are 3 types of civic liabilities, and those include liability challenges because there are long time scales that are involved. And some of the examples are groundwater contamination, seismic events triggered by pressure and changes as well. Now, for emissions trading liability, this is where the emissions trading regime provides a benefit for the CO2 storage. And an accounting mechanism is in place, and in case there could be subsequent leakage. And some of these examples include issues such as capturing, transporting, and storing the CO2. And this is very crucial because when we capture the CO2 source, we have to consider the health, the safety, we have to consider reporting the capture of the CO2 and as well as the property rights. When it comes to transport, we also have to consider the pipeline ownership and the third-party access. And when it comes to the geological storage, this can be anywhere from licensing to reporting and injecting rights, as well as monitoring and the liability. For the incentives, there's a lot of incentives that you can have. One example is, as Hannah mentioned, there could be direct financial assistance. There's offtake agreements. There's also long-term liability, as well as tax incentives that can be captured. And a lot of the things that are created to be done and to have this regime is to create these various frameworks. What I mean by this is once the pollutant that we are treating, it's technically a commodity. So we are switching our thinking, and the legal frameworks and the regulatory regime also depend on our new technology and to think outside the box. Next slide. For sustainability, this is still in infancy, and there are several long-term projects underway. However, there's many sectors that are in control of this. The external social environments, such as costs, such as large-scale releases of the storage, as I mentioned, there can be significant if these occur. But through risk management of the terms on the site selection and as monitoring as a reservoir, designs, we are able to have significantly reduced the likelihood of these releases. And when it comes to the environmental and economic sustainability, these function as through many factors. What I mean by that is the timing of the deployment, the retrofitting, and the external costs of other associated air emissions. All things being equal, from this perspective of the sustainability, we promise to deliver significant economic and environmental fits, especially with regard to combating climate change. As it is relevant into this context, given the amount of cement that is used annually, the use of the CO2 and the manufacturing of concrete would definitely have a major impact on the economic and environmental sustainability. And now I will proceed with Ali, and he will finish with some final thoughts.
So Cemex, let's get right down to it. Currently, as it stands, you are part of the problem. Whether you want to recognize it or not, consumers see you as such. Now, increasing amounts of consumers will see you as such moving into the future. As it stands right now, financially, you are losing a competitive advantage in domestic and foreign markets. National companies are retrofitting their plans to be able to implement a carbon neutral solution, and foreign markets within China and increasingly a decade down the line in Africa are looking to do the same thing with foreign collaboration as well. Again, as it stands financially, you are losing your edge. Again, as Hannah and Margarita mentioned, there's currently a changing legal landscape. This is an interesting circumstance because at the same time, while you're currently in a situation where the legal ramifications of actions and green solutions are hazily defined, it creates an opportunity for you to be able to step in and lead the way. The Paris Climate Accords, are one indication of one national collaboration, a one-off event, if you will. But let there be no doubt, once things happen, they happen again, and they're easier to happen concurrently, continuously. There's clear national interest. There's clear interest in citizens of all these countries around the world. It makes most sense for CEMEX to take advantage of the opportunity that is created from the situation it's found itself in, and to, rather than find itself with its pants down, take the lead and create an opportunity out of the problem it's in right now. So I ask you, would CEMEX want to have missed out on the steam engine in the Industrial Revolution? Would CEMEX want to miss out on the personal computer in the dot-com bubble? I don't think so. I don't think you would want to have either done that. So again, disruptive solutions take too long to deploy and are often too costly. That's why our solution that we're proposing CEMEX to implement is a retrofitted solution. It is a retrofitted solution that will be able to inject CO2 through a pipe into your current existing cement mixers and decarbonize your processes, increase profits, and create a virtuous economic cycle amongst private, public, and community stakeholders. These solutions, again, will reduce your carbon footprint, either neutrally or to the negative. CEMEX can position itself as a carbon sink for the global environment, starting off in the US, moving on to China, and eventually in Africa. We've seen how we expect urbanization to progress in these developing markets. So, some key tenets for CEMEX. You will enhance producer competitiveness and add differentiation to your products by implementing a retrofitted CO2 mineralization solution. Our solution here that we're offering is retrofitted, so there are low barriers of entry. Positive cooperativity from having one plant installed with our solution will mean additional plants will make it easier and easier and easier. The solution is implementable currently with your current infrastructure with minimal new infrastructure needed. Again, that means you have seamless integration with your supply chains that exist, as well as current regulatory bodies that Margarita talked about. To summarize points 4 and 5, really, there is a true opportunity here for a serious win-win solution to pursue ethically sound, ethically beneficial business operations while still pursuing profits and positioning yourself as a market leader, not domestically, not just domestically, but also internationally. Thank you for your time, CEMEX.
The protocol for this part of the program calls for me to lead off the questions. One of the things that you didn't address clearly enough for me is, what does this cost? Does this produce a net increase in the price per yard of this concrete, or decrease, or neither one?
So the solution produces a net decrease in the price of concrete, because the way it works is that when you inject the CO2 into the cement, you're effectively able to use less CO2 per original ton of CO2. So where initially you would be using 100%, I meant cement, where initially you would be using 100% cement to create 1 ton, or whatever your metric is, now you'll be able to use, I believe, is somewhere around 93% cement. So for the same amount of product, you're able to use less cement, because the rest of it is made up by the CO2, the injections of the CO2, which also then enhances durability as well. So the product itself lasts longer as well, and it's stronger.
Okay. I take it this CO2 is abundantly available somewhere?
Yes. So yes, that's the part of the direct capture that the carbon utilization that Margarita was talking about, where you're able to take CO2 in from any either from the air, the direct air capture, or this through normal CEMEX operation. So while CEMEX is making its concrete, making its cement, they're able to retract that CO2 and then inject it into its cement instead to enhance it.
So I take it that not only is this an ethical solution to a problem, it's also economic.
Yes, and that was the argument that we were trying to make, that basically it would position CEMEX to make a better product with less resources and really differentiate itself domestically and internationally.
So why would we not do it? We seem to should be tripping over ourselves to get it done.
Many companies are doing it. So this is a recent, the technology for this has increasingly now started taking off. Direct air capture is something that's been, it's a hot breakthrough field. The way we came across learning about a lot of the technology we're talking about here is that we really were looking at the bleeding edge of companies that are really at the edge of the technology right now, and they're going through rounds of funding themselves to be able to start implementing this technology. There are, I think, I believe it's called Thomas Solutions, or Thomas
Concrete.
Thomas Concrete. Thomas Concrete is an example of one a concrete manufacturer that currently actually does this, and they're in the U.S. And they do save millions of dollars every year after having implemented a solution, I believe in 2016.
Okay, Tracy, do you have any questions?
I do. So I understand that we are co-developing a new technology with a partner in Switzerland, using mirrors to focus sunlight to sinter limestone and clay without burning fuel. Did you all review any other alternative solutions? And if so, what other ideas or technologies did you review, and how did you determine that carbon injection technology is the better technology, both from business and environmental standpoints?
Sure. So a large part of why we ultimately proposed this as our solution, the carbon injection methodology, was kind of 3-part, if you will. The primary part of it was that this, we found, was the simplest to implement, right? The processes that exist right now, there would be minimal to no infrastructure needed to be able to implement the solution. The few companies that have implemented this have been able to get this going within a single day. So there's minimal loss to labor hours, there's minimal loss, or there's minimal disruption to even a day of operations, right? At most, it'll be a day of disruption to your operations per plant. And so that was one, massive benefit that we saw in terms of lost productivity hours, the lack of lost productivity hours, rather. The other reason we went with this really is that the chemistry just makes sense, right? As somebody who with a background in biochemistry in some degree, the process is really just simple chemistry. We take calcium carbonate, CaCO2, and by locking it into the cement, we're able to effectively create more cement, if you will, indirectly out of CO2. And so the reason we like the solution in particular was that not only does it, just really lock it in at all temperatures below 750 degrees, so there would never be a release. You would never have to be worried about, this CO2 getting back into the environment. But on top of that, it just creates a better product. We looked into other technology, other solutions. So there are some other solutions where, there's solutions where you can minimize the amount of CO2s you release. You can slow down the amount of CO2s you release in products. And so I think some of the processes you're talking about, that's actually the goal for some of them, where they're looking to minimize the amount of CO2s released we want to take it one step further, right? So that's why we talk about carbon utilization. CO2, minimizing CO2 release is one part of the problem. You can grow trees, you can do these things to suck up CO2. That all goes back into the environment, part of the natural nitrogen cycle. By actually utilizing the carbon and injecting it and locking it into cement, you're able to provide a permanent, effectively permanent solution. Almost in a way, in a positive sense of the way plastics work, where plastics, they create a lot of CO2, but they're locked in there. This would be kind of similar in that sense. And then once we saw just how much cement expected to be used in the future, we realized that Cemex would, it would just make the most sense for Cemex to be instantly on top of something like this.
Anything
Thank
else,
you.
Tracy?
I think just to follow up on my colleague Tom's question, are you essentially saying that because you're using less cement when you're injecting the CO2, that's offsetting the costs of bringing in the CO2?
That's one aspect, right? So because yes, one, we're using less cement, so that's for sure it also. And we're making up the remainder, the remainder 7%, because 93% cement is now being used and 7% left over. That 7% is now actual CO2. It's actively being removed from the environment. So not only are you, using less of the problem resource, if you will, the cement, but then you're actively taking more and locking it in as well. So you're hitting it with a two-pronged approach where you're reducing your emissions, and the few emissions that you do have, you're storing them in as well, and you're getting rid of them as well then. So it's a two-pronged approach in that sense. And at the end, you're getting a stronger product as well, which means that your cement will, last longer, it'll be more durable. It overall will create less of a need for ineffective cement. And so that's why in production efficiencies, there's profits to be made.
Great.
Robert, it's your turn for questions. When you get done with your questions, if you have any, we move into the feedback portion of the program. And in that program, we tell these folks what they might have done better, what they might have left out, if you think of that. So would you, if you have any questions, go ahead. And then when you're done with your questions, would you transition right into the feedback portion of your presentation, and then we'll follow up the chain.
Sure. What's the downside? What's the downside? And with the organization in the US that's using this process, has there been any specific communication of what has not gone right? And is that data, are they able to share that moving forward with other scenarios?
Yeah, so trust me, as we were looking through this, that was the forefront of my head. I started reading up way more than I should in terms of even like actual books on this matter to really get a background knowledge on, what the issues have been in the past and how this might address them and what the current issues are with a solution like this. I will be honest, I did not find many, but I did find, at least some multiple 1% problems, if you will, right? Small issues that may become relevant. And they're less in terms of the technology. The technology is now there, right? The issues that are more pressing are kind of because the legal situation around this is a little developing. It's very reminiscent of around the .com bubble, when you have these internet technology companies that are coming about, and there's a lot of vagueness within what they're allowed to do, what rules apply to them, what they aren't allowed to do. And what we saw then is those companies were able to take advantage of that, and they really ran the mile, right? We know that a lot of internet companies don't need to pay taxes for being able to, for publishing the way a media publisher might need to do, right? Because they're an internet company. They're able to take advantage of that changing, shifting legal landscape. And that's, that was one good implementation of it. Another risky implementation over here right now is that it would cost a lot, arguably, in terms of maybe, in terms of the legal aspect around lobbying, perhaps make sure that things go the way you want them to go. The policies are shifting in a direction where this would make sense for you. One other part of it is that, while this instantly positions Cemex to be in a very good position, other concrete manufacturers might still have this air of, more tried and true method to it, right? That's always an issue with new technology. There's this air of tried and true method. But with regards to the actual chemistry technology, it's the issue that you face with any novel, innovative technology. It's been here around since 2014 is when it was, 2010 is when this is developing. 2014 is when this became more in the consciousness of R&D, R&D, and 2016 is when this started kind of slowly being implemented. It's still relatively new in the grand scheme of an industry that's as fundamental as concrete and manufacturing, right? And so that was kind of the issue that we found. We found that there's that adoption refractory period, if you will, and really just, understanding how to navigate the legal aspects of that, making sure things go the right way. And that was kind of the biggest challenge, not technologically, surprisingly enough.
Thank you. Ali, great response. Always look for reasons why something may not sound so good, and you covered it specifically. Okay. Overall, I see, I like the example of the US company. Okay. I think that perhaps showcasing the US company and sharing that there was a relationship in research with them and that they're willing to share their findings would probably eliminate barriers to entry and engaging and moving forward in timelines and overcoming scenarios. But other than that, great job.
Tracy, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys all did a great job with this presentation. You clearly know your subject. I think, Alec, you did a great job kicking off the presentation. I always find that's the most difficult part to play, essentially playing MC at the beginning. Ollie, I was about to give you the same note, but did I hear you use the phrase caught with your pants down in the middle there? I think on that, it's always just kind of a know your audience kind of thing, right? If you're very familiar with them, if you know they're casual, if you know they have a great sense of humor, go for it. If not, I would just take a little caution. And the other note on replying to Q&A, I would try to keep it as kind of concise and to the point as possible, answering the direct question and then moving on. Margarita, you were very clear and concise. You were easy to understand and easy to follow. You sound incredibly professional. I think my only suggestion would be almost the opposite there, is being comfortable with a more conversational tone. I think when you started talking about incentives, you really nailed it. Less script, more conversation. Hannah, your presentation style reminds me so much of my own. When I get nervous or get off track, get off my script, it can take me a second to regain my composure. You're clearly a smart woman. You know what you're talking about. Take a deep breath, give yourself a little grace, and try to have fun with your presentations.
Okay, I guess I go last and wrap it up. It's very interesting for you to observe that you have two lawyers on this panel, and they both think in a very similar fashion, because some of the things I intended to say, Tracy has already said. I'm going to say them a little differently because they're very important. I spent 50 years as a professional communicator, and I know that what you need to do, as Tracy said, is you need to grasp the question. And in order to do that, you need to listen really precisely. Listening is a whole lot more difficult than talking. Nobody ever learned anything by talking. You can almost always learn something by listening. So listen better to the questions that are propounded. There was lots of jargon in the presentation. You have to assume when you address an audience like this that maybe only one of us knows anything about cement, and the rest of us are on the board because we're business people or we're broad policy thinkers. So jargon doesn't have a place in these presentations because you lose or confuse your audience. For example, in your analysis of the economics, I would suggest, and I hope not too harshly, that you used a lot of terms that you probably don't understand. That said, thank you very much for your presentation. Speaking for myself, I enjoyed it. I learned something, and good luck in your careers. So that's it.